Welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a special guest, Dan Vargo, a former UT football player. He played in for the Rockets from 1987 to 1990. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to connect with you on this, and Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Yes, Merry Christmas to you as well. All right, let me give you a brief background on Dan. Like I said, he played for Toledo from 1987 to 1990. He led the team with 5 interceptions in 1990, and that was also third overall in the Mid-American Conference. He was also sixth on the team with 54 tackles. He had 9 career interceptions and 200 career tackles. All right. So we're going to basically just I'll ask you a few questions and kind of like, Q&A type deal and
Sure.
any topics that you really want to talk about and that kind of thing. So, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like being a student athlete in college?
It was uh, it was a challenge, I tell you. I think it's a little different than it is nowadays, but in terms of the time constraints, but it was a full-time job, I tell you. I remember just during the season, you literally you'd wake up, you'd go to your classes, hopefully sneak in a lunch between the time you got done with your classes and before you had to get to the locker room to get yourself ready, taped up, and then you would go to meetings from typically 1 o'clock till 2:30, going through the game plans and going through some films, talking about the practice ahead, and then you were out on the field getting yourself loosened up, probably 2:30 to 3, then practice till 5 o'clock, and then go take a shower, and then after your shower, you went back to the film room and spent the time focusing in on film study of the opponent that you were playing that week, and probably got back to your apartment or dorm at the time, whether you were a freshman or upperclassman, and then you know ate dinner and tried to study. So it was, it was a true full time job. And then you would fit into weightlifting. We lifted weights probably 3 times a week, after practice, and so it was a lot of time spent trying to organize. Hey, how do I best spend my time, right? Especially with the studies. I think that was the biggest challenge. But we typically tried to, I remember back in the day, just tried to get the easiest classes we could. It's scheduled for the fall, right? But
Yeah.
but it was fun, and then even off season, it was we were lifting weights 3-4 times a week, and doing stuff on our own, and then spring ball came, and spring ball was a lot different than it is now. I mean, we really hit you know 4 days a week, and it was full contact, and there was no you know
Yeah.
shorts, and kind of and it was full contact, takedowns, all that kind of stuff, right? For 4 or 5 weeks, and so it was different than it is now. And camp itself, I tell you, um camp was interesting because we went full tilt for 2 hours, for each practice. It wasn't like it is now, where you don't have the full contact like we did back then. So I think it made us a little tougher, but that's a subjectable conversation.
Did you guys do 2 a days in the during camp?
Oh yeah, it was 2 a day. It
Yeah.
was it was 2 a days. You know start practice from 9 till probably 11:30, and then had lunch, went back and either hung out in the dorms, and watched TV, played cards or whatever, and for a couple hours, and then or took a nap. I think I took a lot more naps just to get myself refreshed for the afternoon practice. Then you had afternoon practices, for 2.5 hours, and then we would eat dinner, and then we would literally have meetings in the evening till like 10 o'clock. So
Mm.
it was from the time you woke up till the time you went to bed, you were living and breathing football. So
Yeah.
but it was it was difficult, and it was mentally and physically. But it was just, when you look back on it, in terms of it was some of the best times we had. I mean, just developing the friendships and relationships. It was just you guys, the 100 guys and the coaching staff for 2-3 weeks. And looking back on it in hindsight, it was some of the best times I had too, as well as some of the most difficult. So a lot of great memories.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about the dorms. Who was your roommate back then?
My roommate my freshman year was Joe Wendover. He's from Midland Dow. He was a wide receiver. We kind of, they always seem to put an offensive guy with a defensive guy so that we can kind of get to know each other. And he's, still a lifelong friend of mine. Stood up in my wedding, so that's was great, great guy. In the following years, I mean, he ended up being he was my freshman year camp roommate, and then we became roommates, as well during the year in the dorms. But then for camp, I also roomed with, the following years. I roomed with guys like Dave Walkowski, who's a really good friend of mine. Uh, Walter Duncan, who's a great friend of mine. So ironically, some of the guys that I was fortunate enough to be roommates with, we became lifelong friends as well. So um,
Yeah, that's great.
yeah,
All right. So you got to play for both Dan Simmerall and Nick Saban, right?
yep,
How
yep.
was it like being recruited by Dan Simmerall? I know it was different back then. The recruiting, not the same as it is today, right?
Yeah, I mean, the key guy that really recruited me was Tom Amstutz. He covered the Michigan area, and I was fortunate enough to meet him in the Michigan camp, and my between my junior and senior year. And he brought me in, and ironically, just after the camp, he offered me a scholarship, and that sent an impression to me, right? Like, wow, they're this my first offer was with Toledo, and it was at the Michigan camp. And back then they had a lot of the MAC schools went to the bigger Power Five schools, and were, because they didn't have their own camps, but they went to the Ohio State camp or the Michigan State camp and the Michigan camps. And so that was where I first got to meet Tom Amstutz. And then I just a super guy. And there was a guy by the name of Steve Gwynn, who was the defensive back coach back then, who recruited me as well. And then met Dan Cerrone. There was really just a bunch of great guys that were part of the staff. And they when I went down there on my visit, it was everything I was looking for. It was a perfect size school, great reputation for winning. I knew a little bit about Toledo because of a good friend of mine of the family played basketball there. Was on that 79 team that went to the Sweet 16, I believe. So
Mhm.
his name was Brad Rieger, and still to this day, my family and his family are really close. So that was one of the reasons I knew about Toledo and was interested in it. Because I remember going to some basketball games when I was a kid, down at Toledo. So that's how I kind of knew about it. But yeah, I mean, Dan Simmer was a great guy, and just overall the staff was really impressed me.
Okay. And then it was your senior year that Nick Saban came in as the head coach,
Yeah, it was.
correct?
Yeah, it was between. I remember there was a big controversy back then that when Simrel was let go, and it was an interesting time because that was when they were building the stadium too. So the remodel was going on in '89, and there was a lot of excitement for the following season when my senior year, when the stadium was opening. And when we were 6-5, and we probably should have won the MAC conference. We were 6-2 in conference. I think we lost to Bowling Green boy, it was in a game where we should have won. And I think there was a fourth down play, if I remember, and there was a missed tackle by somebody that led to on a fourth down play that they converted, and then they ended up scoring on the last play of the game to beat us. If we would have made that play, so to speak, we would have been MAC champs in probably in '89. And I just felt like we maybe underperformed maybe to the expectations of the new AD, who was Al Bow. But I tell you, Al Bow made some decisions that really I think put Toledo on the trajectory of really the moving on from from an average program maybe at the time to really to be like the key MAC program, right? I think that's what Toledo's recognized as, and I think other MAC schools would probably agree. So I think it was the right decision. As tough of a decision it was the right decision, and I think Saban was just right from the get go was just such an impressive person, and I can't say enough about playing for him. It was probably the greatest experience that I had, and that looking back and I learned more about football in that one year than I had in my prior, football life, was just being able to be part of that staff. I mean, being part of that team. And it wasn't just Nick Saban. We had, Phil Parker was my defensive back coach for 3 years. But he was also part of the staff with Nick, and he's the DC for Iowa now. He's had a great career, and he's just was really big influence for me. He was super great guy and great coach. And Dean Pease was the other one that really impressed. He's had an unbelievable coaching career as well. I think he's won a couple of Super Bowls as a defensive coordinator in the NFL, and he was our defensive coordinator. So we had a really good staff. And actually, I keep in touch with Phil a little bit on text every now and then, and guys like Kirk Heidelberg, who was the the tight ends coach at the time. Still stay in touch with him a little bit. He coaches in Germany right now, in some of the pro football that they have going on there. So a lot of great relationships, whether it's coaches or players. It's truly been one of the best things in my life was being part of the Toledo program.
Yeah. And then that senior year, you guys won a MAC championship, right?
Yeah, we were. I tell you, we were 4 points away from being undefeated. We just, and I mean, not to brag, but our defense was pretty solid that year. It was. I think we might have been in the top 16 in the country from a defensive standpoint, but we had some youth, I think, on the offense. Kevin Mager was a sophomore quarterback at the time, and he obviously turned out to be great quarterback for Toledo. But we did have some younger guys. We had some guys like our offensive line was loaded. We had, Jerry Evans was a tight end, that played in the NFL. We had, Andy McCollum was the center at the time. He's, played 15 years in the NFL. I think he's got a Super Bowl ring. We had, Ricky Isaiah, Romaldo Brown were the receivers. Neil Trotter, Pat Johnson were the, fullback and tailback. And Ben Mitchell was a big guard. I mean, just, really, Craig Kuligowski, I'll get very two-time All-MAC coach, defensive coach for Toledo right now. I mean, he's, still a good friend of mine. We stay in touch as well. So yeah, we just really had a really good team. And then defensively, we had, guys like Dan Williams, who, was drafted number one draft. I think probably the only number one draft choice in Toledo history, if I think, right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Darren Anderson was a cornerback who was, played with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Matt Eberflus is a head coach of the Chicago Bears. I still, text him every now and then, congratulating him when he wins down there. So, just a really strong team, I thought. And if we had a couple bounces go our way, we would have been undefeated, really. So great memory. That's, one of those, obviously the greatest, team I was part of as a Toledo, but also in probably in my life. It was just a fun team. Most of my memories come from that 90 season for sure. Dave Wakowski too, who coached, he was still a good friend of mine. He was, he coached a lot of years at Toledo, coached at Georgia Tech, coached at Washington State, Memphis, and, had a really good coaching career as well. So a lot of great guys.
Yeah. And, one thing I'm noticing with everything that you're saying, there's been a lot of good coaches that have been around for a long time, coaching
Yeah.
a lot of great places. Um, so really it's so much more than just the head coach, right? Your
Oh,
whole coaching
absolutely.
staff seemed like it was just loaded.
Yes, it was. It really was. I mean, you really think about it. There was a lot, and a lot of guys that from like I said, from that team went on to coaching, right? And I think I don't discount what Saban's influence on that season, had on some of the players, right? And that ended up getting into coaching, right? Dave Walkowski, Kulagowski, and Eberflus, right? It's three guys that went on into coaching right after after Saban had left. And the one thing about Saban is I tell you, he comes across as this really disciplinarian and tough. He was very tough. I mean, no question about it. I think he's tougher probably on the coaches than he maybe the players. I think players develop a strong respect for him, but he was never he didn't play favorites. I mean, he was a thing I liked about Saban is he was in the every single day, man, he was working. I mean, he was out there teaching and coaching. He wasn't standing on the sidelines, walking around and in the stands or standing up in a, like you see sometimes on a high rise, watching from above, right, what's going on in practice. I mean, he was literally working the drills with you. When if you did something wrong, he was showing you the right technique or the proper fundamental to really coach you and make sure that you were you knew how to play the game from a fundamental standpoint and a mental standpoint. He made just understanding the game so much easier. He just would break down film and put together schemes that made sense. I mean, I go back to one game we played in Northern Illinois our my senior year, and they were rolling when it comes to offense. I think they had put up 700 yards of rushing one game in that year. I think it was against like Fresno State, and I don't remember the timeline of that was before or after we played, but they ran that triple option back in the day, right? And I'll
Hmm.
never forget Saban walked into our meeting room and he's like, guys, because everything you learned in camp and everything you learned in spring, he goes, throw it out the window. He goes, if we run a base defense against these guys, they'll run up 700 yards against us, or something like that. And he goes, we're putting in a completely different scheme to you have to be fundamental in terms of what your responsibilities are, and we're going to do develop a scheme just for this week. And we put in this defense, and it was so simple, like to follow. It was like if this tight end blocked down, you did this. If the dive back did this, and the option guy came out your way, you had the pitch, or you had whatever the position was and what your responsibility was. It was pretty detailed out, and because they didn't run that many different plays off of it. So it was it was just really making sure you had the fundamentals down in terms of what you needed to do from a responsibility standpoint. Man, we played them, and I think we won 21-7, but I think they had 200 yards of total offense or something like that. It was totally due to the scheme that he put in, right? And teaching it and making sure everybody understood what they needed to do and walking through it and mentally. Um and I just remember that just man, this guy really knows what he's doing. And it was funny because some of my friends to this day remember, some of my high school friends to this day remember me calling him one day, and I said, they were asking me about this new coach, and I said, he goes, so how do you like the new coach? I said, guys, I said, you know what? I said, this guy knows football like it's a science. I go, I promise you, I go, this guy's going to be like the next great college coach. This guy's not, going to be staying at Toledo long. And, every now and then they'll laugh. I remember when you told me that Saban was going to have some a pretty good future. I said, yeah, I guess I didn't know that. I didn't know it was going to be that,
Yeah.
going to end up being the greatest probably college coach of all time. But yeah, I really enjoyed, it's one of the, great memories is obviously playing for a guy like that.
Yeah. And
And
so,
Dean and Phil too. I mean, those guys were equally great guys to work, play for.
yeah. And so I'm sure, it's one thing for the coaches to come up with a game plan like that, but as a team, you have 1 week to prepare for a completely different defense. What is that like?
Well, yeah, and I say that because he made it simple. Like that was the key. Like I think a lot of he brought in a lot of NFL because prior to coming to Toledo, Saban was at the Oilers with Glanville. I think what was it Glanville? Remember Gary? Was it Gary Glanville? I can't.
Jerry Glanville, I
Jerry
think.
Glanville, yeah, Jerry
Yeah.
Glanville down in Houston. So he brought a lot of pro concepts to Toledo, and we were doing a lot of disguise coverages and things like that. I mean, it was fun. I mean, I had 5 interceptions that you referenced in the beginning. It was a lot because he would set me up. You know what I mean? He would set a play up to really kind of sucker a quarterback to make a throw that it didn't look like I was we were in a specific whether we looked like we were in a man coverage or we were in a zone coverage, and we flipped right at the snap of the ball. And he just did things like that really helped you out. I mean, Saban, he said this one time, and he says, and I always remember this: is coaching is about putting your players in the best position to make plays, right? It's the player's responsibility to make the play when it's there, but the coach's our responsibility is to put them in the position, the best position to make the play. And that's what he did. I mean, he puts you in that position and helped you become a better player and really teaching and helping you understand what you were trying to do with the specific defense. And so yeah, but when that whole thing, like I said about that week, I mean, it was the most simplistic game plan you could imagine, but it worked. And I think he wanted you to not overthink things. He just said, you
Mm.
know what you got to do, know your responsibility, and react. The more you think in this game, or the less your reaction time is, right? So you got to be able to know what you're doing and react. And I think when you react quickly, you play faster and you play smarter. So and play more aggressively. So I think that's a lot of what he did. Just made things simple and really tried to teach you why you were doing something.
Good. And do you have any other favorite stories that you'd like to share with us from your playing days?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great memories I had. This was early on in my career. Was and I know it's referenced a few times, is when we played down in the Orange Bowl in '87. I was a redshirt
Mm.
freshman, and I was playing cornerback. I started out the season as a strong safety, and then we had a couple injuries, and I asked the coaches at the time, "Hey, I'll play cornerback," because I think we needed a cornerback, and I never it was more of a safety. But so I finished out the season. I think I started the Bowling Green game, Miami, Ohio game. I can't remember midseason, and then played cornerback the rest of the year. But we went down to Miami of Florida, and they were playing against the Hurricanes with um, Michael Irvin, Brett Perryman, and geez, they had so many Benny Blades and Brian Blades, and I mean, there was just team was absolutely stacked. I think they were maybe number one, number two in the country at the time. They ended up winning the national championship that year. But we played them. Ironically, we played them at the end of the season. Usually you play
Mm.
those non-conference games early in the season, right?
Yeah.
Well, we were playing. It was our last, and we didn't have a real good team that year. I think that was the worst team we were on. We were 7-1 or something like that. I can't remember. We struggled. We had a lot of injuries, and really a lot of young kids were playing. Because of the injuries. I can't remember how many redshirt freshmen. A lot of the guys that were on my senior team were playing in that game. Um, so we go down and we're a young team playing against the Hurricanes, and we played them tooth and nail. I mean, we ended up losing 24-14, I believe, but that game was a lot closer than people even realize. Like we gave up I remember we gave up a touchdown right before halftime where they kicked off, and there was a fumble. The ball popped up in the air. Guy caught it in and went in for a touchdown. So they got a cheap touchdown there from on a special teams play. And so really we for the most part we held them to 17 points. I think we held them to under 300 yards of offense, and their first team was in the entire game. And I remember, Jimmy Johnson on the side, he was their head coach at the time, just screaming, man. He was so mad because we were hanging, and we actually, I think, in the fourth quarter had the momentum. Like we were driving, and we were shutting them down. And if we had an extra quarter, we maybe even an extra, 5 minutes, we may have, be able to pull off an upset. But that was it was a great experience, just overall, just playing down in the Orange Bowl with so much history. And I just remember walking out in the stadium, looking around, saying, the Super Bowls have been played here, and all that kind of stuff. And remember as a kid watching the Orange Bowl as it was always like the highlight of New Year's Day, the evening, sitting down and watching the Orange Bowl. So it was it was one of the great memories I had for sure.
Yeah.
And I didn't get beat for a touchdown. That was my,
There you go.
which I was, a little bit, worried about at the time, as you can imagine, going against it. I definitely, definitely played a little bit deeper that day than normal. So
All right. So so you live in Florida now, right?
no, I actually
Or
I live in Michigan.
oh,
Yes,
okay,
I'm
okay.
actually, yeah, I'm in Metro Detroit. So
So you probably get back to the glass
yeah,
ball a lot then,
yeah, I do.
campus.
I'm a season ticket holder, so I definitely, I get down to a couple games a year. It's, I still love going down there. I just, it's a little saddened to see the attendance hasn't been as great of late, I just always am amazed because it's such a great game day atmosphere down there. I think a lot of the issue too is the timing of these games now, and the midweek games. And I think the last game I went to was the Bowling Green game, which, um, you know, should always be on a Saturday, in my opinion. Why would you, put that on a midweek game? But
Yeah.
it's still just a great place to watch a game. And I try to make as many games as I can because I truly enjoy, the atmosphere there.
Yeah. And that's a good point about the midweek games. I'm sure that has a huge part with the attendance down the
Oh,
stretch.
absolutely, it does. Absolutely, it has to
Yeah.
be, right? People have jobs, they've got family commitments, they've got, kids that are, involved in things that they got to, drive them around to and to do during the week, so there's just people that like to travel to the game, whether, I'm an hour, you know, north, but it's difficult to try and go down to a midweek game if I'm
Mhm.
working and drive down. And fortunately, that when I went to the Bowling Green game, I had a meeting that I was doing down in Columbus, so I just went to the game on that Tuesday night, and I drove down to Columbus the following morning. So that worked in my schedule. But other, it's not the norm for most people, right? Is to to try and work those games in. I mean, it's nice to see that. I mean, I think that the kids were there. I mean, the student section was full. It's just the
Mhm.
general population out, the Toledo area, people that would typically go to a Saturday game. It's difficult to do that, I think, during the week.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the current team. And defensive back Quinyon Mitchell, he's been getting a lot of press lately.
You know
What
what,
are your thoughts on him?
that guy stood out to me early on. It was funny. I do text um, Craig Kuligowski still, who's obviously a defensive coach, and early on in the season, I remember saying, "Go man!" I said, "I don't know, number 27 and number 25 look like studs to me." I just, I said it early on. He goes, hey, he put a thumbs up on the text. I go, both those guys really, I tell you, impressed me. And just Max and Hook, I think, is 25, right? He comes up and hits, and he's all over the field. Seems to be a smart player and so young. I mean, you just see, wow, next year or two, how good he's going to be. But Mitchell, my God, his ability to redirect on the ball on those flat, you know, outside flat passes. Probably one of the better anticipations that I've seen from a college kid in a while. He's just, I don't know what his his measurables in terms of what his 40 time is and all that kind of stuff, but he really looks to me to be a pro. I mean, if he can run a strong 40, I think I could see him being a pretty high draft pick, but it's remains to be seen on all that stuff that the scouts look at. But what a
Yeah.
great player, and it's exciting to see so far that none of these guys have gone to the transfer portal or anything yet, and I think Toledo's done a really good job of keeping players, which I think is a testament to the program. I mean,
Yeah.
I looked at Northern Illinois or Kent State. I couldn't believe how many guys that they lost.
Yeah.
Western, looks like they lost some guys. So, um, the more you can keep guys in the program and potentially add through the portal, I think it's that's the game. I think going forward,
Yeah.
especially in the MAC. Um,
Yeah.
so
And the portal, I tell you, that's just getting out of hand. But
yeah,
you got to give credit to the coaching staff and just the program at
yes.
Toledo that there's only been two players that have entered the portal this year. That's
Yeah, and I
amazing.
think I think that's a testament, really. It shows you that there's definitely a connection between the coaching staff and the players at Toledo. I mean, people can complain about the inconsistency sometimes or the discipline and the penalties and things like that have occurred over the last few years. But ultimately, the kids, I think like being at Toledo. They like playing for the current staff. I think some of those things can be worked on, right, and improved. But ultimately, I think the program is in good shape. I think I look at Candle a few years ago. He recognized that the defense wasn't what it needed to be, and he made some tough changes and some tough decisions, and brought in Kuligowski and Vince, to run the defense. And boy, I think that the way they play defense now compared to what they were 4 or 5 years ago is night and day. I mean,
Yeah.
they've had their lumps a couple times. I know the Buffalo game at the end of that fourth quarter was not not a great fourth quarter. I know that early in the Bowling Green game and the end of the Bowling Green game were tough, but overall, I think that they have been really really solid. And I think that it's only going to get better too. And it's some good talent on that side of the ball for sure.
Yeah. And you definitely have to give Candle credit for that because,
Oh
like you
yeah,
said, the defense was really struggling, and
yeah,
he made the decision to change things, and he brought in some great hires on the
yes,
defensive side, and it's been a huge change,
yes.
huge difference.
Yeah, it's a big difference, right? I mean, they're so much more aggressive. They're faster. Their tackling's better. There's not these wide gaps in the defensive line like there was. The linebackers weren't filling appropriately. It was really hard to watch. A few years ago, it really
It was.
it was a hard watch, and it was frustrating. But but now it's I think that they've really fixed that, and they got some the right schemes in place and the right talent that fits what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And
So
so we got the Boca Raton Bowl coming up here in a few days. Um, what are your thoughts on how this game will go?
I haven't really seen Liberty play. I just know this. All that matters is Toledo, right? I mean, I think if Toledo is focused and they play every snap and are dialed in and just are mentally ready to play 4 quarters, they win, right? It's just that's been the frustrating part is just seeing that them play 3 out of 4 quarters, right? I mean, Kent State, right?
Mhm.
They weren't ready to play in the first quarter for whatever reason, but they played their butts off the next three, and Bowling Green, they weren't ready for whatever reason. Maybe it was a midweek game. I don't know. How do you not get ready for Bowling Green? But they were sleepwalking that first quarter, but the rest of the game they played their butts off to get back in that game, take the lead. Unfortunately, at the very end, I think there was just a couple execution issues on the defensive side, on that last play or last couple plays. I think it was that third and long play that really
Yeah.
should it was defended right. It was the right coverage that was in place, but I think there was a corner that jumped up on trying to, thought that the quarterback was going to run and let somebody get behind him, and it led to a 3rd and 20 getting converted or whatever it was. But but they shouldn't have been in that position, right? If they were ready to play the first quarter. Look at the Buffalo game, right? I mean, dominated that game for 3 quarters. I mean, really dominated that game, and then just for whatever. I don't know, what. I can't put a finger on it, right? I'm sure the coaches, I have a hard time putting a finger on it either. But if they can play 4 full quarters, they're going to win. And I think that's, pretty much anybody on their schedule, if they can, focus in and dial in for 4 straight quarters, they've got enough talent to compete with anybody on their schedule, aside from, when they played Ohio State or somebody like that. Right.
Yeah.
But I suspect if they, like I went to the game, the bowl game, I mean, the MAC championship game. They played a great game. They were ready to play. They were, you know, going, full speed, for every single play. You can see that they wanted that. You could. So if they want this game, the bowl game, I think that they'll win. But
Yeah.
again, I don't know. I haven't seen Liberty, but I think it's all about Toledo.
Yeah.
I think any coach will tell you that it's really about us. It's not the opponent. We got to do what we got to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. All right. Well, thank you, Dan, for joining today.
Yeah.
I'd sure like to have you back sometime too and talk more.
Hey, anytime. You know what, Brian? I tell you, I love talking Rockets football. It's one of my passions. Again, I was fortunate enough to play there, so it's always near and dear to my heart talking about Rocket football. And